Hello. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Anthony Varallo, Director of the MFA Program in Creative Writing at the College of Charleston. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Grief and Ghosts, Lorrie Moore in conversation with Summer Anderson. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsors, Carol and Rock Hildebrand. And thank you all for coming out this evening. Celebrated for her originality and distinctive voice, Lorrie Moore describes her new novel, I Am Homeless If This Is Not My Home, as a political and personal ghost story. Told with her trademark wry humor, this tragicomic story of a road trip through a troubled America explores questions of life and death, past and present, grief and devotion. Professor of English at Vanderbilt University, recipient of a Lanham Foundation Fellowship, as well as the Penn Malamud Award and the Ray Award for Achievement in the Short Story, Lorrie Moore will be in conversation this evening with Summer Anderson, who is a festival board member and reviewer for Books A Million. Tonight's session will begin with Lorrie Moore reading from her novel, and then she will engage in conversation with Summer Anderson. There will be an opportunity to ask some questions at the end of the session. The first time I met Lorrie Moore was at a book signing in Prairie Lights Bookstore in Iowa City. I was a grad student at the time, and like everyone else in line, I revered Lorrie Moore as the epitome of what great writing was. Like, to the degree the to the degree that, let's say, a space alien were to show up at your doorstep one night and say, Earthling, I have journeyed to your planet to find out what great writing is, it would take you maybe half a nanosecond to hand the alien a copy of Self-Help or Who Will Run the Frog Hospital and say, well, here you go, your journey is complete. As I stood at the book signing line, I could see and overhear other grad students saying witty, clever, and hilarious things to Lorrie Moore, who no doubt was saying witty, clever, hilarious things in return. And I realized with some terror that soon I would be expected to say something witty, clever, and hilarious to Lorrie Moore, who smiled pleasantly when I handed her my book, as I thought, I can't think of anything clever to say, except that I hadn't thought it, I'd just said it. To Lorrie Moore, who looked up at me with what I wouldn't describe as a pitying glance. Maybe more like the look you might turn upon someone who shows up or arrives at a family funeral wearing an umbrella hat. What I wish I had said back then was thank you. Thank you, Lorrie Moore, for writing Like Life, Birds of America, and now I Am Homeless If This Is Not My Home. Another masterpiece to place alongside all the others. Thank you for continuing to show us what great writing is. Won't you please join me in welcoming Lorrie Moore and Summer Anderson.
Thank you very much. Well, that was the most interesting introduction I've ever listened to. Thank you all for coming on this very beautiful day. I really didn't think anyone would be here, so you guys are troopers. Thank you so much. I've got this weird thing that looks like a baby threw its cookie on my face. You know, and it may interfere a little bit with the mic, I'm not sure. And then I have this thing in my pocket that is the other. See if I can get it back in the pocket. I feel like a little bit like Captain Kangaroo with this, but okay. So I'm going to read a little bit from this novel and then we're going to talk about it. The novel's very weird, so I really felt I needed to read from it for 5 or 10 minutes and then we'll just get into it. So, the part I'm going to read from is sort of like smack in the middle. The focus of the novel is on a character named Finn, and he has just been informed that his ex-girlfriend has died, committed suicide. and been buried rather quickly in the Green Cemetery, because that's what you have to do with green cemeteries. It's a little bit like a Jewish cemetery. And so he has gone to sort of find where she's buried. So this is a little Halloween-y. And there, I think that's all you need for this section. There was Lily, standing in the dead fleabane, holding a large grapefruit like a globe. In a green cemetery, you can't have any markers. You can only have organic things. You can't have plastic or anything that's not going to degrade. So he's come, and there she is. I've just skipped ahead here. Okay. Her shroud draped around her, a cocooning, filthy gown. She seemed to have emerged from a mist that still swirled about her feet. Beneath the shroud, she wore some institutional white pajamas. In her familiar stance, but at a list, or had he cocked his own head, she appeared briefly off balance, waving like a lamprey or a balloon boy at a car dealership. She still had the proud, fabulous guesswork of a tree to match the gold, rose, apple hue of her hair, deliberate, undone. Crazed death had not yet made a stranger of her. She smiled at him with a mouthful of dirt. Her face still possessed of her particular radiant turbulence, yet watery, as if he were seeing not so much her face, but its reflection in a pond. Her eyes were the dead bone buttons of a white dress shirt. Then suddenly color, their greenish gray, washed into them. "What kept you?" she asked. Finn didn't say, as perhaps he should have, "My brother has been ill." "They did not stitch your shroud," he said instead. He looked over her shoulder, then back over his own to see if someone else were in on this. "Yes, something of an invitation. Can't ever resist an invitation. I guess I'm like a bad penny," she said. She brushed some bits of leaf from her hands, always turning up. He did not know what to say. He was mute with staring, too stunned to speak. "A bad penny for your thoughts," she said. Lividity had purpled the left side of her face. They had buried her in a hurry, and on her side, her coiffure perhaps had lost some tidiness and shine, but he had always loved whatever her hair was, even the clown wigs. I neglected to mention that she had actually worked as a therapy clown when she was alive. So that's in this part. Lily tried again. "Therapy clowns are natural escape artists," she said. "But you know that toast we used to make, 'Here's to mud in your eye'? Let's not ever say that again." She let the grapefruit drop to the ground and wiped her brow with the back of one hand and fussed with the shroud, which had formed a hood at her collarbone. "This is like an infinity scarf gone very wrong," she said, then glanced up. Infinity here meant twisted, plus a wrong turn. They had buried her in her clown shoes. They loomed beneath her mangled white trousers like water skis. Silence descended as if from a bell jar. "I suppose there should be a howling wind," she said. Finn cleared his throat. I think there is one," but the air barely moved. Leaves scuttled slowly like crabs across other leaves. "You're in fine fettle for a dead lady," he said. He was waiting for her to start a proper overture in which she would announce all her themes: resurrection, despair, surprise. He knew that possums and birds sometimes faked their own deaths. Lily shrugged, or something like a shrug. "I guess death's kind of a spectrum." "Yeah, it would appear that way," said Finn. "Late-stage capitalism," she said, whatever that was supposed to mean. Maybe it meant that death really did cost money, that the afterlife, like life, continued to charge you for things. "Do you know about Schrodinger's cat?" she asked. He knew that it was about the dead and the living lying side by side. Instead, he said, "That's not the one where the telling of the thing destroys the thing?" "No," she said, "cats aren't much bothered by that." "Are you trying to tell me you're a thought experiment?" "Oh, Finn, you always knew that." Again, like a tree in wind, her utterances were the thumps of falling apples. Did you think I had forgotten you, she asked. No, he said. He had no idea what he thought. Everything seemed scrambled and unstable. He studied the hieroglyphs of her eyes, which still had something like unworried worry in them, blinking like a warning that was also a party light. You actually look well, he lied a little. In all the years he'd known her, her gaze seldom lost interest in anything. It contained no repudiation of life. Repudiation of life was expressed in almost everything else about her. Why, thank you, she said. I'm afraid I've let myself go a little. Without showing her teeth, she smiled, continuing to wipe soil from her mouth with the back of her long, thin hand. The worms haven't got me yet. Ugh, there's one. She brushed it off her sleeve. Some larvae clung to her cheek as if to a plum. She seemed simultaneously sinister and comically benign, as if both the past and the present had smashed her within their grip, shattering her only slightly. Finn kept having to clear his throat. So you aren't deeply dead? He had suspected it all along. Was she not the very soul of ingenuity? Did he not know a conspiracy when he saw one? And the unbearable, agonizing joy of it burst on like hot lights within him. Do I seem deeply dead, she asked. Her smile felt the same to him in all its summoned width and wanness. I suppose I'm death adjacent, she said, so maybe they rush things. Everyone's in such a fucking hurry to do the right thing. Guess I'm the residual hullabaloo of the well-meaning hinterlands. Did you have a change of heart, he asked. Changes of heart, she said, are my superpower. Finn exhaled a short snort of a laugh. He tried to keep the bitterness out of it. She glanced down and kicked at the mist at her feet, perhaps to locate the grapefruit. Whoa, they buried me in my clown shoes, she said. Her clown shoes were men's Oxfords with floppy glued-on extensions, all painted apple red, the laces like candy canes. He was filled with the flooding, fond missing he could always muster for her. He studied her slightly new bearing. She bore an expression and posture of disequilibrium. Shoes are a nice touch, he said. I think everyone's become a little deranged, but really a nice touch. The floppy shoes were, of course, absurd, but familiar in that he had seen her in them so many times before. The white worm, now twisting on her neck, was new, however, as was the silverfish in her hair. I'm sorry, covert ops are also my superpower plus. They contain the most potential comedy. She pursed her lips. That was my honors thesis for my therapy clown certification. Yes, well, said Finn, perhaps not all comedy is as therapeutic as a program like that wants to insist on. Kids got it, she said. Of course kids got it. She began to study him back. One of her loose lavender hands hung down at her side, while the other clutched her shroud like a shawl. Her body seemed to have settled, like the contents of a suitcase are said to shift during flight. There was flattening and twisting, new angles, and a little stoop. You have remained very handsome, I have to say, she said. Losing my hair, said Finn, anxiously palming his head. You always thought that, she said, only a little true. Besides, it looks distinguished. I cut it. Yes, well, she said, you know you're not supposed to cut your hair while your beloved is at sea. He could also point out to her that he had shaved rather quickly. He rubbed his chin on with his hand. It's been almost a year, Finn said. After a decade of living together, he had not seen her since last New Year's Day. I didn't know where my beloved was. I didn't know what sea. Should I have not pursued my existence? I was pretty much abandoned, Lily, like the lamb tail that gets tourniqueted and left to dry and drop off the lamb. I was the lamb tail, she insisted. No, Lily, you were the lamb. There was sternness in his voice. You were the lamb on the go. Yes, well, maybe the black sheep. I guess I'm now just Death's useful idiot, she said. Death gets bored and sometimes wants to travel. Wow, look at me. She pressed one hand against her abdomen. They might have found my organ donor card. I might not have a liver. She moved the white shroud and revealed a bloody bandage. Are you serious? I guess I better not drink, she said. I'll drink for both of us, Finn said. Not a problem. She continued brushing dirt from her sleeves. Forgive me, a change of clothes before seeing you might have been smart. Sorry. Do I have mushrooms growing out of my eyes or anything? Your eyes are clear. Good, good. That's what it feels like to me. She plucked some strands of hair off her brow with two twiggy fingers. He cleared his throat and shifted his weight. Are you still on Facebook? She was quiet for a moment. That's what you have to say to me? She asked. No, he said. I have other things. I'll leave you there. I don't know.
Well, I think you have set us up very nicely.
Okay.
This book is wild.
It's weird.
It's
Yeah.
weird. I will say, I read it first, and it took me another time because I had to surrender to the fact that it's a dead person on a road trip with the ex-lover. And once I surrendered, it was great.
Yeah, it has to knock you back and you have to surrender. But that's a little bit like all
This is true.
novels. You have to surrender to them. And if you can't, you have to sort of write DNF on your Goodreads evaluation.
So, where did the idea of this book come from? How did it come to you?
It came from a couple of different directions. I was thinking a lot about death.
Mm-hmm.
You get to a certain age, such as my age, and suddenly a lot of people you love are no longer there. You lose them. And I thought how unbelievable that is, and how there's ways in which you go into denial about that. And so I created a character who's in Finn, who believes in certain kinds of conspiracy theories. He never accepts the official story. Mm-hmm. He doesn't even really accept the fact that they've broken up, he and his girlfriend. He's like, that's not real. Mm-hmm. And so when he's told that she's died, and then she appears, that's something he's receptive to. That's something she knows he will be receptive to. And so I got interested in the ways in which we try to commune with the dead.
Yep.
I have emailed dead people and then pressed send. Have you ever done that?
I have never done that, but I have been on the receiving end of people in my life who have died, and phone calls will come, and you just say, at
phone
that
call?
point.
What do you mean?
Well, someone called to say, I'm looking for Gail Clements, and I said, well, she's dead. Because in that state, you have lost all capacity to roll out the pleasantries. Yeah. And you have to find dark humor to get you through, I think.
And what does the person on the other end say when you say Gail's dead?
I'm so sorry.
Oh.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Well, there's another novel where you actually say, yes, this is she.
Well, that would have been more interesting. That would have been a much more interesting choice.
There you go.
So when you sit down to write a novel, do you start with the setting, the characters, tell me where you begin. Is it the same for every novel?
No. And I'm known, I shouldn't say I'm known, I have no idea what I'm known as, but I am called a short story writer all the time, so that's really what I have, through the decades felt most comfortable writing. But I have written 4 novels, and this is the 4th. And usually people look at my novels and say, oh, you call that a novel? Okay.
No, I think you're absolutely.
Especially my first novel, they did that. They went, oh, that's a novel?
Oh. Yeah.
But at any rate. So each of them begins differently. Mm-hmm. And with this one, as I said, I was interested in how someone might still continue communicating with the dead. It begins with a document from the 19th century. It's an innkeeper who is writing to her sister, and it's a document that Finn, the main character, eventually gets a hold of. So everything is from his point of view, including the document. The document, which is letters from one sister to another, is the thing that he's reading, and that's sort of where it begins. And I did a little 19th century research and had fun with that.
Interesting. And so when you begin a book, do you know where the story's going? Do you have an idea
I have an idea.
of some checkpoints that you will hit
Yeah.
on the way?
Yeah.
Do you surprise yourself by the ending?
You have to surprise yourself all the time, or the reader is not going to be surprised. If it's too, predetermined, it's going to feel inert, and the reader will sense that. So you have to have some surprises, but you also have to have a sense of momentum, like where are you going? Road trips are kind of
Pretty good.
a cliche of momentum in American novels, but whatever, there it is. So, what was the other part of your question? I forgot.
Doesn't matter. So I know that you took some inspiration from The Boarding House, from Tom Stoppard. And when you...
Did you read that in an interview that I did?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I've only mentioned it once.
I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. Because
Is it?
these two, the 18th century and the 21st century, they didn't, they kind of, but they don't, there's not a lot of intertwining going on.
Right. When I was working on this book, it was so weird, and I didn't show it to anyone. But when people were asking me about it, I would say, well, I've stolen the structure from the Tom Stoppard play,
Right.
Arcadia, which I didn't really do. But then I saw an interview with Tom Stoppard, and he said he had stolen the structure from
Right.
some other,
Right.
convention. And I think he said there were any number of playwrights who had done this thing, which is taking a building and having it, taking a set or a house or building and having it straddle two different stories across time. And you go back and forth. If you know Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, it goes back and forth until the end, where it's all happening simultaneously within the building. So I have a boarding house in this book, and I couldn't make things happen simultaneously the way you can on a stage. But they're going back and forth, and
Alternate.
and Finn is right, and Finn is reading the account from the boarding house.
Fascinating. So you you moved from Wisconsin, where you spent many years, to Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to talk a little bit about the genre of Southern Gothic and how did moving to Nashville, did you have that in your mind before you moved? Did you feel like you were entrenched in it once you arrived?
I started this book once I moved to Nashville. I moved in 2014, and that's when I really started this 2014, 2015, 2016. I was doing a bunch of different things, but I was getting this off the ground those first few years in Nashville. People have asked me about the woman who was the Southern innkeeper. They said,
Elizabeth.
well, boy, the South really influenced you. But people in the South do speak with a little more humor than Northerners do. They speak with a little more color, picturesqueness. And, but I had this character in my head, and she just would talk to me. So that's the craziness of fiction writing.
You converse with your characters.
They converse with you.
They converse with you.
They won't listen to you at all.
They're in control.
They're in control.
Do you have a daily writing regime, a schedule that you keep to?
I'm not very good with schedules.
Me neither.
Which is bad because I teach for a living.
Right.
And I find myself madly dashing out of my building in Nashville, headed for class, and my neighbors will say, oh, hi, Lorrie, how are you? I haven't seen, and I said, gotta go, because I'm late for class.
Late for class.
I'm late for
Exactly.
class.
So you were a professor for many years
Yeah.
in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
and now in Nashville at Vanderbilt University. Can you talk a little bit about what teaching means to you?
Okay, I was just going to go back to how my writing schedule, which doesn't
Oh yeah,
exist.
we
but
didn't go
yeah.
there. Yeah, let's go back. Let's go back.
Yeah, okay. What teaching, all right, they're connected. Because when you show up in front of a class as a writing teacher, and that's what I am, even though I give my students lots of things to read, because that's really the only way to teach writing. But you have to show up a little bit reluctantly, and they sort of have to feel that.
Okay.
They have to feel that they have a real writer in the classroom.
I see.
Not a teacher who writes. They have to feel they have a writer who teaches.
But considering your reputation, I mean, you have the breadth and depth of your work, short stories and novels. Surely they know.
I have no idea what they know, but when you stack these books up, it's only like this high. it's not that high. It's not that big. Oh well.
Self-depreciating.
But I write whenever I can, and I let my students know that teaching will get in the way of your writing. But teaching is a separate muscle in your head, and you can learn a lot from teaching that has nothing to do with your work.
Right.
But I've learned about, you keep learning about young people, and it's not pretty.
The game has changed.
And now I have a bunch of students who say, oh, that's so 20th century. They really, because of when they were born, they really feel the 20th century is what the 19th century was to us.
Wow.
I'm saying us, but to people
yes.
of my generation.
Yes.
And they really don't want to have anything to do with anything in the 20th century. But you have to reacquaint them with the 20th century, because it does sound, because of the accidents of the numbers when they were born, and the 21st century is their century. It does sound like a long time ago to them, and it's not. So I'm wrestling a little bit with that. But they're very smart. They're very smart.
Is it undergraduate?
I teach both.
Both.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Do you feel like teaching and writing criticism, which you do a good bit of, does that affect your writing at all?
Sometimes when I feel that teaching is getting in the way of concentrating and really entering a world of fiction, I feel that writing a review of something or an essay about something is easier to do than creating a whole new world.
Yeah.
It's easier for me to, I don't want to suggest that making art is harder than reviewing art.
I would think it would.
I don't want to suggest that, I just want to say it.
Yeah, we're just flat out. I don't think anyone would negate that sentence.
But it's easier to bounce off of something, and then, writing is writing, and writing can be hard, and you still care about style, and you still care about your sentences and your paragraphs and everything.
Back to an earlier question that I'm sorry, I asked one right on top of it, but in terms of your schedule when you are writing, whether that's a short story or a book.
Yeah. It's kind of all over the place. I guess that's what I'm...
But you must feel compelled. So you maybe don't need a schedule as much. Like some people I would think would need, I have to sit down.
I think maybe when I was younger, I know when I was younger I wrote every day.
You did?
Every single day, yeah. And I got a lot of coffee. You drink a lot of coffee, start to write.
Right.
But this was before the internet. This was before Wordle. I can't. If I could get all that Wordle time back, I would be very happy. And also that Wordle caffeine. You should not waste your caffeine on Wordle.
No, you should
and
not.
then Spelling Bee came along. That was really terrible. No, but getting the coffee on the page and having a project that's going and doing something on it every day, every morning with a cup of
Right.
coffee is really what you should do.
I, I got a sense,
Yeah.
I had this thought when I was reading this book that you were just at your typewriter or your computer or longhand. I don't know how you,
I've done all of those.
have you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's your favorite?
Well, actually, I like the computer
Right. Well,
because that's Wordle
that's
spelling
so
bee
you
on
can
it.
just pop over and do some Wordle.
But I tend to tinker a lot, and so it's easier to tinker with word processing.
Right.
But you do lose your drafts when you do that. The thing about the old typewriter and doing things by hand is when you fix things, you had a manual copy, and you could
Right.
check against, you could
Yeah.
say, oh, maybe it was better the original way, but now on the computer, the original way is gone.
Right.
So,
After you write something, when you're editing it yourself before you send it to your editor, how many times do you go through?
I don't count them.
Is it a
because
lot?
I'm tinkering so much that I don't know what going all the way through would really mean.
Okay.
Like I start to go through it, and then I
Okay.
stop and fix something.
Right.
Then I start over,
Uh-huh.
then I fix it. And by the time, so it's a little bit like combing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
fixing. And
Yep.
if I can get through without fixing anything and get to the end,
Yep.
then I imagine that it's done.
Right.
But then I wake up in the morning and read it again, and
Oh,
it's
you
not.
do.
Yeah, so I'm constantly tinkering.
Okay. So it sounds fully formed when you ship it off to your editor. Pretty.
That's what I like to think, but that's not always what the editor thinks.
I have an interesting question. I was looking at the dedication page, and I noticed that you dedicated it to your "I'm homeless if this is not my home" to your siblings.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. And then I went back through all my other Lorrie Moore books because I thought, well, does she always dedicate it to her siblings? No, it bounces around. And so then I'm thinking, that must be a hard thing as a writer. I mean, you're liable to, you're going to ruffle some feathers, I would imagine.
Why?
Well, maybe people get their feelings hurt if you don't dedicate it to them.
Oh. Well,
don't worry about
well,
that.
well, you do worry about that. That's why you dedicate it to them.
And was there something in particular about this book that made you dedicate it to your siblings?
Well, it's about siblings.
Yes.
It's about,
Yeah,
it's a woman
love it,
writing
yeah.
to her sister.
Right.
It's
Yep.
Finn is dealing with the death of his brother. It's a lot of siblings in there.
There's a lot of siblings.
So I hadn't I think I put my sister on some dedication page or other
Another one.
before, but I put my brothers there too.
Yeah, that was.
So,
So
but my
w-
first book,
Oh, yes,
I
please.
didn't dedicate to anyone. And I thought, I thought that was sort of mean of me.
It's like Snoop Dogg. He says, "I thank me for me."
Yeah.
I thank my success. I thank myself.
This is dedicated to me. But it did have that aspect to it because the
Right.
title was self-help.
Oh.
And I didn't mean it to sort of be like, nobody helped me.
Right.
I think that I might have, at the time, I don't know, I think I had just broken up with a boyfriend and I thought, no, I'm not dedicating it to him. I don't know, I can't remember.
Right.
And I thought it was too heavy to dedicate it to my parents at the time. My parents came along later, I dedicated
Yeah.
one of the books to them.
Some dedication.
Yeah, but the first one had none.
None.
And
That's
I
interesting.
began to think that was bad luck. Kind of not
Look at
good.
the luck you've had. Well, it's not luck. It's hard work, but
I don't know what
it was no bad omen. I don't think.
I don't know. It was. I don't know. It got a bad jacket
Yeah.
cover.
Okay. Are
And
you heavily involved in the design of the jacket cover?
I try to get involved, but I don't have any legal right.
Oh,
like,
no.
I think John Updike had that written in his contract
That's
that
pretty
he could.
interesting.
That he could approve the covers. Very few writers get cover approval, but they want you to like the cover.
Well,
But
they want you to promote your book
yeah,
and like
they
it.
don't want you to be embarrassed to sort of stand next to it, which with my first book I sort of was.
Oh, no.
It was very pink. A hot pink, before the Barbie craze. It was very pink and
That is-
jagged, and I hope the designer is not in the audience.
No. That seems a strange choice.
Yeah, I burst into tears. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And they hadn't shown it to me, and there it was, and it had no dedication, and so the whole thing. Live and learn.
Well, it was right out of the gate, Lori. You had to give yourself some credit. So, talking about titles, where did this? I know that I Am Homeless, If This Is Not My Home, is drawn from Finn's first section, or I assume, when he sees a sign that belongs to a man sleeping on the sidewalk. But the sign is declarative and definitive. It says, I am not homeless, this is my home. And I was thinking a little bit about death, obviously, as I read this book, and I also think that we make our homes in people.
Yes.
So when they pass on, we are homeless.
That's right.
Would you?
I was thinking of all the ways one feels that way. I was thinking of it. It was my working title
It
from
was.
the beginning.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I thought, this is going to be a hard sell, and it was.
Yeah.
But it was my working title. I thought of it a little bit like a blues song.
Oh.
And I also thought of it a little bit in conjunction with Lily's depression and mental illness, and how that kind of emotional darkness is not feeling at home on the planet
No.
at all. You don't, if there's that sense of being unmoored, or having no roots or no connection. And so everyone is a little bit homeless in different ways in the book. And of course, the boarding house is a sense of
True. Transience.
right, right.
When you think about I lost my question.
You lost your question?
Thank you for bearing with me. When you think about Finn and Lily and the love that Finn has for Lily, do you feel like that it's reciprocated by Lily? I mean, was it her depression that kicked him out of the nest?
Well, I think they broke up the way people break up, which is usually it's a combination of two people. I do feel this is a love story.
Absolutely.
And if you have a love story where one person loves the other and the other person doesn't, that's going to be a problem. So yes, I do feel they both love each other, but perhaps Finn loves her a little more.
Always, yeah.
But I do feel that in her way, that she's come back to him because she knows that he will recognize her and believe in her.
And she knew he would come and find her.
Yep.
And he knew where she wanted to be buried.
Well, he's told that earlier.
Right.
Oh, you mean in
At
the
the body
right,
farm.
Right. The novel owes a little bit to Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, which is about moving a dead woman to a different cemetery, to the one that she wants to be buried
Right.
in. And so I have a little epigraph from Faulkner.
Yeah.
Faulkner's in there.
Oh, deeply. And that sets the clock ticking. A decomposing body,
I guess.
I
Yeah.
think, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want to open it up to some questions, if that's okay.
People are probably so confused.
I'm interested. Can we get a show of hands of how many people have read this book?
Oh, my lord.
A lot.
Oh, fantastic. Wasn't it weird? It's a weird, they'll tell you, it's a weird book. Yeah, it's weird.
We have two mics in the audience, and we just ask that you stand up when you ask your question and make sure it's a question.
That's all right. You don't have
Okay.
to make sure
Oh,
it's a
right here.
question. Yeah.
Thank you. It's wonderful having you here. And my question is, your subject matter on this book is so unusual. did you do research in thinking about how people commune with the dead, or was that something in your own psyche and your own mind that you sort of worked through?
I didn't do research on that. I did research, strangely, on 19th century boarding houses, about which I know too much. And I did research on the Booth family, and if there's anything you want to know about John Wilkes Booth or Edwin Booth, I am an expert. People usually go, no, we're good. We don't need to know more. They were all horrible, including Edwin.
Yeah.
He seems to have escaped public judgment, but he shouldn't have. At any rate, I did a lot of research that didn't go into the book. But the communing with people who are no longer with us is just something I found myself thinking about, because when you start to lose a lot of people, that you're kind of doing it. You think you see them in public, you think you hear their voices, you dream, you send them emails. I sent a friend.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe he had died. I thought, I wonder if his email still works. And I sent him an email. I said, I've been thinking about you, blah, 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 blah. I wrote him a long letter and pressed send. And I really didn't think it would go, but it did. And then his wife wrote back and said, I do this all the time. Feel free to send, because she's doing it too. She's sending him emails.
Wow.
It's just because it's unbearable to think of these people as not being there to talk to on the phone, to write emails. So I didn't research that part. I just kind of went with my own experience and feelings. And, there are a lot of people who talk about after someone has died, that they have very vivid dreams about them, visitations. And they don't feel like regular dreams, they feel like visitations. And I've had those. I've had the sense of, wait a minute, like thinking you see someone in a crowd that is someone who died, that kind of thing. So that was the kind of emotional thing I was trying to pull into the book. It's not really, that part is not researched at all. But the booths, I can tell you about the booths. Nobody
And
wants to know.
speaking of the booth section, he was a rapscallion, I call him, in the boarding house. I didn't really realize, I was a little slow on the uptake on that part.
Well,
Who, in fact, that rapscallion was.
Well, we don't know if it was him, but there were lots of people claiming to be him.
Okay.
That's what's very weird.
Yeah, why would...
There were dozens of people, because he was a hero to the Confederacy.
Ah, yes.
And so there were people claiming to be him. There were people who claimed to have seen him.
Right.
There were lots of rumors that somehow he had gotten all the way to England, all the way to India.
Interesting.
There was a man who died, and see, now I'm going down my little research rabbit hole. There was a man who died in India with a kind of version of, I think his name was Jackson Wilkes or something.
Okay.
And he left all of his money to everyone John Wilkes Booth would have left money to. The mother, the sister, they got this money.
Really?
They were very wealthy, the Booths, because they invested. They made money in show business, and then they invested in things.
Where did they come from?
The father came from England.
Oh.
He was a bigamist. He left his first wife over there and came over there. But it was a big theater family. Big theater family of crazy people.
I didn't know that. Gotta watch them. Okay. Yes. Next question.
First of all, I thought it was hilarious. Thank you. But my question, I'm always interested in writers like you who go back and forth between novels and short stories. And I was curious, do you decide beforehand, or do you get in and know the characters and then think, oh no, you need to be short, or you need, how does that work?
Yeah, I'm asked that question a lot, and most of the time you know right away whether something is a short story or whether something's a novel. And if it's a novel, you know it's going to take years. You know you're just going to have to get lost in it for a couple of years, and that it's going to require a large canvas. It'll have a stretch of time in it. It will maybe have several different points of view. It's hard to do more than one point of view in a story. Now, Alice Munro can do that. She, when you look at an Alice Munro story, she's doing everything that novelists do. She has time as a medium, time as a subject, different points of view. She has documents and stuff. Yeah. That's what I was thinking of when I put the document in the front of the novel there. And on my book tour, someone gave me this bracelet,
What's it say?
which is like a little Taylor Swift bracelet, but it says Alice Munro.
Oh.
Isn't that great?
It's a very dear thing to do.
She said nobody wants to wear a bracelet with their own name, but I'm making these with everybody's favorite writers.
Oh.
So Alice Munro is a favorite writer of mine in that, well, she's just a great writer, but she's really a short story writer, but her stories have the heft and the accomplishment of novels. And she does. She's one of the only writers I've heard of who supposedly sits down to write a novel every time. All of her stories in her head were novels. And that's very unusual. And then they come out as stories. That happened to me only once. I thought I had a novel, and it was just a long short story. But usually they're doing such different things, a novel and a short story, that you don't get the jobs mixed up. But Alice Munro is very interesting that way because she's always trying to write a novel. I'm always trying to write a very long novel. Like every novel I think I have I think, well, this is going to be 1,000,000 pages long. And it comes out to page 178, and it's done. So that's the problem I have. But mostly if I'm writing a story, I know it's a story because it's going to have only one point of view. It's going to have a focus on a particular conflict between characters. It doesn't require the space and breadth of a novel. But different writers, as I say, are different. So.
Have you ever been writing a novel and you pause that, write a short story, and go back to the novel? Or is it one thing, then another?
I have written short stories while I have a novel going on my desk, yes. Because if you have the habit of writing stories, as I do, you can suddenly get ideas for short stories, and you have to respond to them, otherwise they're going to disappear. So you have to keep both things going.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I've done it.
Okay, we've got one right here. Yes, thank you.
First, thank you for reading to start this. You read beautifully.
Oh,
my question is,
thank you.
in the editing process, do you read the text aloud? And if so, what is the value of that? The second part, do you have any say in who does the audio version of your writing?
I'll do the second one first. The say and the audio, they give you some people to choose from, a little sample, but it's not a big sample. And, and they all are usually actresses or actors who are very good, and you just kind of go eeny, meeny, miny, moe, and pick one. But I cannot listen. I've never listened to a work of mine on audio. I just can't get past 30 seconds of my own writing. But I had an experience recently where James Naughton, do you know James Naughton, the theatrical actor who, he's been on television. He was the star of City of Angels. He read a section of this book, about 10 pages of it, and he read so beautifully. I didn't know what he was reading from. It was just totally transformed. It wasn't my work anymore. It was his, and it was beautiful. So I had that experience of listening to things. But mostly when I listen to audiobooks of my work, I just can't bear it. I did do one version myself, also in a Nashville studio on Music Row with sound engineers, and I probably won't do that again either. But do I read things aloud? Many writers believe in that. They believe you should read your work aloud. And I sometimes tell my students to do it, but I also share with them that the sound they're hearing in the room is not the sound on the page, and you can get confused. I mean, John Franzen is famous for always reading things aloud, and he will change things. And you do hear things slightly differently when you read aloud, but the voice most writers are trying to get is a voice that you cannot reproduce by reading aloud. It's this voice that's going to bounce off the page and into the reader's mind, and it's not audible in the room. So you can become slightly misled by testing it out loud. On the other hand, it's got to correspond to your ear. So it's like an inner ear for me, at any rate. It doesn't, so reading out loud, it can sound different. It can sound better. It can sound worse, but it probably will not be precisely what the reader will hear or read when they see it on the page. That's a very long answer, but does that make sense? Yeah, okay, all right.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Hi.
I was really taken with the language that you used to describe the decaying of Lily's body. It was very evocative, and I noticed that it gets a little more lurid or disgusting as it goes on, as it should. She's decaying. And it struck me that maybe you were having fun with that because it was amusing. But I also wonder what else might have been going on with that language. If it's a story about grieving and letting go as a process, it occurred to me maybe the language somehow related to that process of, that almost metaphorical, increasingly disgusting as he grieves. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but I just wondered what you were doing with that language and if you really enjoyed it as much as it seemed like you might have done.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's a love story, and I wanted what was happening to her not to get in the way of his love. And so, he still loves her. She's like, she's got worms on her, but, so I wanted him to still care for her and all of that. I did think that she was sort of a ghost, but I wanted her also to be real. I mean, I had to go back and forth between that corporeal idea of her and the ghostliness of her. But so I'm walking around a lot for several years thinking about their car ride and this and that. So there were things I would see, and I would go, oh, I'll bet that's what her leg would look like, or that's what her hair would look like, or that, and so I'd put them in. But I didn't research corpses that much. I did a little. And when you go to see people who are in hospice or who are dying, it is what you sort of see happening to them. And so you can you can still love them, but also, so I was documenting a little bit of, my imagining how a body would continue from various stages of dying and illness. So, but there is a moment where I allude to her abdomen as sort of looking like a spring roll. Now, and you can never eat spring rolls again after that. But
I had one last night.
That I got from looking at a spring roll. I looked at a spring roll. I thought, that's
exactly what that would look like.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, right here.
Hi, thank you for reading.
Hi.
I would like a bracelet with your name on it.
Oh. Well, I'll tell my friend Emma. Oh.
One of the descriptors that I have heard a lot today is, and even you have said it, just like referring to this book as like very weird.
Very weird, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think it was very weird, but I guess one of the ways in which I could see it being weird was like the choice to, as a writer, to have, you know, the ghostliness of her versus like the humanness of her be like kind of enigmatic and not really said concrete. And I was wondering, was that something that you decided like very early on when you started writing it? And how differently do you think the book would have been read or like ended had you decided to like announce it, you know, or like be so like straightforward about it versus like keeping it kind of like this enigmatic thing where you like don't know if he's with like a dead person or a live person? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and it is the question people have asked. Someone in Nashville stood up and said, is she real or is she not real? I said, she's a fictional character. She's in a book. She's just words on a page. But I know what you mean. There is, so she wanted a statement from me. It's from Finn's point of view, so we have to sort of take his point of view, and this is his experience. And it has a little, it defies certain rules of realism, I suppose. But it is his experience. I wanted him to have some obstacles in his love that you could see that would be obstacles for most people, but that aren't obstacles for him. And then I was doing the Faulkner woman going to a different cemetery. I mean, in Faulkner, the dead woman speaks as well. I mean, she only gets one chapter, but she speaks. So that's So I wanted it to end finally with her gone, and yet she lingers in his head, and he still feels there are sightings. He thinks he sees her. It's this sort of ongoingness of people when you lose them. I mean, there's this way in which I suppose you could have a definitive line and someone is just gone, gone, gone. But in this case, I wanted something to persist. And because it's from his point of view, and there's lots of things he does not believe in, and he doesn't even believe they broke up,
Yeah.
So he's a little stubborn about things, and he doesn't believe that we landed on the moon in 1969. He thinks that was fake, and we just did it in 1972. And pretended to do it in 1969. So for those of you who haven't read the book, you'll see he's an eccentric guy who has his own set of beliefs and disbeliefs. So he would obviously go into this experience in a way that feels ambiguous for the reader. But I wanted you to feel his experience, and so it's a little genre bending in that it's not precisely realistic, but it's also got a lot of realism in it. So,
Great.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's all we have time for
Okay.
today.
All right.
Thank you so much
Okay,
for coming.
thank you for coming. Oh,
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Summer Anderson and Lorrie Moore. Many thanks again to our sponsors, Carol and Rock Hillenbrand. An important reminder, we have books for sale right here. You can go back there and get yourself a copy of Lorrie Moore's latest. I highly recommend that you do so. And then Lorrie will be kind enough to sign copies of her book right here in front of the stage. She'll be set up here at a table. So with the holidays coming, I think you would do well to buy multiple copies and bring them up. A signed book is a gift that keeps on giving. All right, one more round of applause for Lorrie Moore and Summer Anderson.